This is Salesforce Simplified, the podcast from Ad Victoriam Solutions. Here's your host, Mike Boyle.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today on the podcast. We are delighted to have as a guest Megan Burns. And Megan is a customer and employee experience expert. She's here today to talk specifically about AI and how it's being incorporated into B2B customer experiences. So before we introduce Megan officially, just a little bit more about Megan. As I said, she's a customer experience expert, strategist, author, and a keynote speaker who helps Fortune 500 companies build world-class customer experience programs. A world-renowned expert in her field, Megan has led groundbreaking customer experience research as a vice president at Forrester for more than a decade and has helped countless Fortune 500 firms use customer experience to build loyalty, accelerate growth, and find strategic advantage in this ever-changing world. And those who pay attention, those who've been long-time listeners to the Salesforce Simplified podcast, may recall that Megan was a guest back in September of 2021, and we talked about B2B and customer experience. And if that is something that's top of mind with you, I highly recommend that you go back and find that podcast on our website at advic.com, advic.com, or anywhere that you get a podcast. Megan Burns, welcome back to the podcast. It's great to have you with us today.
Mike, it's great to be back. Thank you.
Let's just dive right in here. There's a lot to talk about, the relationship between AI and B2B. You know, many B2B companies struggle with inconsistent customer experiences across different touch points. Let's talk about how AI can help create a more unified experience, especially when dealing with multiple stakeholders within the same client organization.
The answer to that question is emerging. And the interesting thing is that most of my work these days is focused on really change and influence. And so the piece of AI that I look at is how are organizations responding to it and how are employees, frankly, willing to use it? How much do they trust it? And so I think it has the potential to do several things. One, it has the potential to summarize. It's very hard for people to get a sense of what's going on across a large customer organization. Different people are having different conversations, and it's hard to keep up to date with that. Depending on the company, some are, and really it's up to whether or not their clients are comfortable with this, their customers are comfortable with this, using some of the same AI recording and meeting tools that you and I use as a way to capture and summarize customer conversations much more simply than was ever possible. I mean, let's face it, how many of us actually go back and transcribe the notes from a conversation? We always say we will, but we don't.
Wink, wink.
Wink, wink. I've seen some interesting things being done with translation. That was an application that I had not really thought about, particularly in companies that have highly technical or highly specialized content. If they work with companies or employees that span countries, using AI to help take this complex information and make it more available to people by translating it into other languages or making it something you can listen to or watch in other formats. I'll be honest, most of the clients that I work with are really, really cautious in their use of AI. So I think we're really just in the early stages of this, but people are finding ways and places to use it.
So, Megan, as you know, we're seeing AI being integrated into CRM systems like Salesforce. How do you see these AI capabilities transforming the way B2B companies handle, the complex multi-stage sales cycles and post-sale customer success?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One of the big applications that I'm seeing is when you have a B2B company that serves a large number of employees in the customer organization, right? How do you keep track of what everybody's doing and who's who and what are they using and all of those kinds of things, and then turn that into some sort of a sense of adoption, account health, things that an account representative could then use to have a conversation with the decision maker. The companies that are using AI to help paint that picture and summarize that information can walk in with a much better sense of where the customer organization is actually having value and succeeding. I've seen a couple interesting things. I don't know, frankly, how much I trust this, but I'm watching it. People attempting to use AI to predict how someone would respond to a survey if they took one. So from the people who are, giving feedback and taking surveys, one of the problems has always been, I forget who, but one company called it the voice of the silent. How do we know what the people who are not answering our surveys are thinking? And so I've been seeing a few people trying to use AI to say, based on what this customer has been doing and what other customers have done in the past who have completed surveys, can we anticipate whether this is someone who's going to be upset or at risk, and get to them and flag them without them necessarily, even if they're not willing to, I should say, give explicit feedback.
That's interesting. That could be very helpful,
Yes.
when I think about it. Megan, let's talk about some misconceptions B2B companies might be having about implementing AI in their customer experience strategy, and talk a little bit also about what they should focus on instead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a misconception, but people are very much in the throes of the technology is going to solve all our problems. And AI is the latest in the parade of technologies that have been glommed onto, right or wrong, as the thing that is going to fix things. And it's really a mix. Some people are super optimists, other people are, cynics and pessimists. Most people are kind of like, I think it could do both, but I'm not sure how to use it. The thing that I think they're not paying enough attention to, and this is an area that I've been digging into in my own research, is the issue of trust in AI. In the consumer space, and humans are humans, whether they're buying in a consumer or a B2B environment, there was some interesting data published recently about the fact that when a company mentioned AI as a feature of their product, the conversion rates actually went down because people are nervous about, and they don't know if they trust AI. The bigger the decisions that people are using it to make, the more people are involved in the decision. Everybody's got a sense. One of the things with AI is that very few people, including myself, really understand how it does what it does. And we kind of crave this understanding, especially if there are legal issues involved. Like, can you be held culpable? Like what happened with the Air Canada example with a gentleman who booked a bereavement ticket and was told he would be reimbursed because the company's AI told him that. And then the company said, no, the AI was wrong. And the court said, well, you're beholden to the AI because it was part of you. I think that's a place where a lot of people are also hesitant to trust. It's just sort of unleashing AI directly. I think they're going to get there, but in the late 90s, we asked people, would you ever buy something online? And some huge percentage of them said no. Obviously, people change. But I think that's the place right now that the technology can do a lot more than the humans are comfortable letting it.
Sort of along the same lines of what you were just talking about there, and you did mention this a few moments ago, is, we're still in the early stages of this. We're all still learning and trying to become comfortable with it. But let's talk about how AI can help B2B companies possibly predict and prevent customer churn, especially those high-value enterprise accounts. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a tricky one because really so much of the churn lives inside the heads of the decision makers in the organization, right? I call it the messy middle. We love to talk about, the experience, the events, here's what happened. We love to talk about the outcomes. They renewed, they didn't. But all the rest of it, the perceptions and do I want to keep doing business with this company, right? It all lives inside human beings' heads. And so it can be tough to, take into account all the different factors and really understand what someone is thinking. I do think that there are opportunities. One of the scenarios that I'm really, really excited about right now is I'm working with a client who wants to do a better job of supporting their customer when there's a leadership change at the decision maker level. So normally the decision maker in your customer organization changes and you're kind of like, oh, okay, we're starting from scratch. I have a hypothesis, as do other people, that being the way that you handle that scenario can help prevent churn. And so I'm interested in seeing how, and it's going to take a while for the data to get to the size, but seeing if we can't use information that we can pull from the organization and the person to really start to think about what's the best way to do things at these, it's an overused phrase, but these moments of truth, some of these transition and risk points that I don't think companies have traditionally paid as much attention to as they should have.
I want to get your thoughts next on personalization at scale. In particular, B2B relationships are often more complex than B2C. So what do you think about how AI can help deliver personalized experiences while maintaining that human touch that's very critical in B2B relationships?
To me, I've always replaced the word personalization with relevance in my head. It's not about, I know that anytime it says, hi, Megan, in a computer interface, there's no human on the back end that recognizes that it's me, right? That's all technology. So I think the personalization and the relationship at scale is really about being not only sending things and sharing things and tools that are hyper relevant, but not sending things that aren't. I mean, the biggest problem people have, I shouldn't say the biggest problem, but one of the big problems people have right now is there's just so much coming at them. And it's always been the case that companies that show restraint end up having customers who prefer that experience than people who just sort of say, here, send everything. So knowing what not to send, potentially timing. And there's been some very interesting stuff that's been around for a while in terms of conversation analysis and emotion and tone analysis, particularly as we move more towards digital. I run a book club and we read a book recently called Can You Hear Me by Nick Morgan. He's a Harvard professor, and it's all about how communication is different through digital channels. And so much of the nonverbal signal that we use to understand emotion and make human connection and pick up on how people are reacting to things is either stripped out or muffled in technology. And so thinking about how, as we move more towards being able to make sense of these digital interactions that are happening, can AI help us understand, what kind of a communication style does someone have? Are they starting to tune out? As a speaker, could it help me potentially get a read on where my audience is so that I can change my tone or my style or pick up the pace, midway through if I'm starting to lose them? So for me, it's the human dynamics piece of it that is most interesting, but I also think helping companies get more relevant in what they send and don't send their customers to potentially help.
Megan, in the world that I live in here, Salesforce's Agent Force has become a very big new tool in this world. I'm curious your thoughts on how B2B companies can leverage AI tools, such as that one, to provide a proactive support rather than just a reactive kind of problem-solving tool.
I honestly don't know. And I know That's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but that is at a level of detail that I don't usually work at with companies. I'm usually working more at the corporate level. So I think the specific applications, of potentially flagging a situation and taking action, I wouldn't want to misspeak because I don't know what I would need to know to be able to say that. I'm following it closely. I'm interested in seeing it, but I just am not that close to it right now.
And just for those who are listening to the podcast, we recently did one on Salesforce's Agent Force. So we talked to our inside AI guy. And if you'd like a little bit more about what we're talking about there, you can just go to the previous podcast. Let's talk about some unexpected ways that you've seen AI improve B2B customer experience that most companies might not have considered. And again, we're still in that realm of, we're early into this, but any early thoughts or observations there?
Yeah, again, the applications that I'm seeing people be most comfortable with are helping employees internally. So I did a project toward the end of last year with a contact center staff that had, decent functional relationships with their people, but they didn't have a lot of emotional intelligence in their conversations. And they didn't necessarily know or realize how they were potentially coming off. And this is a regulated industry, complex organization. And so we actually looked at, and I helped expose this team to some of the tools that can help you anticipate how communications that you send might come off to people, help you, strike the right tone with the things that you say, avoid having people infer emotions or implications from the things you say, or especially writing, that you didn't actually intend to. So that is one in particular that this team has really, I finished the project in December, so it's only been a couple months, but they were really excited to learn and see that there were tools to help them do that, because they're super nice, friendly, caring people. But as more of their interactions move from the phone to email and other digital interactions, they didn't feel as confident that they could convey that warmth that they feel over to the customer.
Human interaction, Megan, as you know, has been, the crux of what you do with B2B customer experience. It's kind of changed here with AI. And I'm wondering about the balance that B2B companies should be thinking about there, the balance between automation, with AI, through AI, and human interaction, especially with those high stakes client situations. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, ultimately, people want problems solved correctly and quickly. And so, to the extent that AI and technology can help do that, more so now than was the case 20 years ago when I started, not having a human interaction is actually the preferred experience for a lot of people. One of the interesting things that I found, a research report I read years ago, I think it was also in HBR, was that people are more satisfied with automated interactions when they know they have the option of talking to a human, even if they never actually do. So this sense of control, this sense that I could get to a person if I needed to, I think is a way to potentially balance that. Obviously, high stakes situations. When people ask me, what should our customer experience strategy be? The phrase that I give them is to be consistently good and strategically amazing, because consistency is really important. It's not sexy, but it's so important to customers. I've had many situations where customers say, our clients would rather have us deliver when we say we're going to than deliver faster. They'd rather have us be consistent. They're okay with the timelines that we're using. So I think the strategically amazing, when is it strategic? Sometimes it is the typical, high emotion. There's a problem, there's something that needs to be dealt with. There are other times that it can be, what is the nature of your brand and what are the things that, you lean into as a company? And can you use AI to help you, do something unique and different in a place that is particularly reinforcing with your brand? Product startups, release upgrades. It's harder to give specific examples in B2B, but that's where I think the opportunity lies, is in being more consistent with getting the basics right, and then enabling and supporting the amazing things in the moments where it's going to make a difference.
One of the things that could make a difference is the subject of metrics. And I'm really kind of anxious to hear your thoughts on this. Again, we're early into this. We're just kind of getting rolling here, but just your thoughts on maybe some early metric steps that B2B companies should be focusing on when measuring the success of an AI implementation in their customer experience strategy.
Measurement was the very first thing I covered when I got to Forrester 20 years ago. So it's a topic near and dear to my heart. And one of the things that I realized is that the core elements of measuring an experience, the quality of the experience, don't change based on how that experience is delivered, right? I want it to be fast. I want to feel like I was heard. I want to, so I think people may think that we need all these new metrics when we introduce AI. Really, what we're doing is looking to ensure that we are still meeting the sort of fundamental human needs that don't change. We're just doing it with a different technology. So the kind of core definition of a good experience and looking at that, when we use AI versus when we don't, doing some standard testing. Obviously, there are operational elements of AI in terms of, did it deflect more contacts? Did it prevent potential churn? Those are all things that matter to the company. But I always kind of envision a 2x2 matrix that says, can we deliver an equally good experience more efficiently using technology? And it's got to be both of those. I am increasingly, I don't want to say harping on my clients, but encouraging my clients to be more explicit in the way they measure and talk about trust with their customers. I'm working on an article right now with a colleague about just how big this lack of trust problem is. And I think with AI in particular, it's an opportunity to see how customers' level of trust. In one of the recent Salesforce State of the Connected Customer, they talked about whether or not one of the survey questions was whether or not people trust companies to use AI ethically. And the perception of whether or not the ways that they are using it are actually ethical, I think, is something that we ought to be watching closely, because what the customer thinks and what we think internally are, usually not the same thing.
So this, as everyone obviously knows, it's not a video podcast. So you can't see Megan, and she's got the crystal ball cap on. I'm going to ask her about AI in 3 to 5 years. Megan, what do you see as emerging in terms of AI capabilities and the biggest impacts that are yet to come for B2B customer experience? And can companies prepare for that?
I'm not sure how much any of us can prepare for much of anything these days. Nobody knows where things are going to be tomorrow, let alone in 3 years. But I think looking at, the obvious applications now, but I think the opportunity to do things that customers would expect you to do or would hope that you would do and do them proactively, right? There's a lot of places now where, like, changing an address, something as simple as changing an address. When I moved, this was 13 years ago, but I moved and I have the same company for auto and home insurance. I know this isn't a B2B example, but it's an easier one to understand. And I was applying for a new homeowners insurance policy with this company and they approved it. And it was going to be my primary residence. Was that enough to trigger them that, I should change the address on my auto insurance, or at least ask me, hey, does this mean you're changing? There's so many opportunities for things like that where there are, pieces or steps or things in the middle that just don't get done. And it's not necessarily, a big deal that it's not there, but it could start to be a big deal if there are companies that can do it. And there's this whole layer of work that the customer organization no longer has to do.
Well, I don't want to wait 3 to 5 years to have you back, Megan. I think there's enough here, and you've given me enough food for thought that we can check in with each other again real soon. Maybe just talk not specifically about your clients, but just some feedback that you're getting about AI and how it's performing and, impacts and metrics and things like that. So you have an open invitation. I'd love to have you come back.
Well, thank you so much. I can't quite process the fact that it's been 4 years since I was here last time. When you said that, I was like, "No, it couldn't be that long ago." But,
It was. And again, I just want to, highly encourage folks to go back and check out that podcast, because we had a very wide ranging discussion about B2B customer experience. And those same things still hold true today. I promise you. Megan promises you. Thanks, Megan. I really appreciate it.
my pleasure, Mike. Thanks, everyone.
And if you would like to connect with Megan, I highly encourage you to visit her website. It's megan-burns.com. MEGAN-Burns, BURNS.com. I will have that link and some other helpful links inside this episode's show notes. Hey, if this is the first time you are checking out our podcast and you like what you heard, would you please give us a follow? Tell your friends about the podcast. And if you listen on Apple or on Spotify, would you consider giving Megan and I a 5-star review today? Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. People ask me why we say that. Well, the reason is simple. It helps us get the word out throughout the community about the podcast. So thank you very much in advance. And lastly, if you are a podcaster and you're looking for guests to speak on your podcast about all things Salesforce, MuleSoft, or technology in general, you just visit the Contact Us page at our website, advic.com, advic.com, and we will gladly put you in touch with an Advic team member for your podcast's next episode. I'm Mike Boyle from Ad Victoriam Solutions, thanking you for listening to this episode of the Salesforce Simplified podcast. Our next episode is just around the corner.
You've been listening to Salesforce Simplified, the podcast from Ad Victoriam Solutions.